You've heard Billie Eilish's song about it, but what actually is a dry dock? And what do they do there? The answer to the second question is easy: build enormous ships. But the first one takes a little more explaining. A dry dock is a structure used for building, repairing and maintaining ships. It can also be used for constructing other large watercraft like submarines and even aircraft carriers. The word dock itself comes from the Old English word doka, which simply meant shelter or harbour. So when we say a ship is docked, we literally mean it's taken shelter in a protected area of water. But while a dry dock might seem like a simple idea, its construction is an incredibly complex feat of engineering. This is especially true when we're talking about the dry docks used for building megaships, the largest of which can carry over 20,000 shipping containers. These megaships are so big, in fact, that their hulls are often wider than the roads designed to transport them. So how do these massive vessels get to the water? The answer involves a series of floating dry docks. These floating dry docks are essentially miniature versions of the sheltered docks we mentioned earlier. They're sealed compartments that allow workers to pump out the water inside them, which keeps the ships afloat. Once the water is pumped out, the dock is lowered until the bottom of the ship rests on the surface of the water. At that point, the water is pumped out again, leaving the ship sitting on blocks. Then the ship can be worked on. When it's ready to go, the process is reversed and the ship is floated back into the water. The downside to using floating dry docks is that they can only work with ships that are being built in sections. Because they can't lift a full-sized ship out of the water, the alternative is building the ship piece by piece, then putting it all together once it's out of the water. That's why, if you look at images of ships being built in dry docks, you'll notice that they almost always look like giant pieces of Lego. The biggest floating dry docks in the world are built in China and can lift ships weighing over 300,000 tons. While impressive, these are still nowhere near the size of the largest ships ever built. To get those behemoths off the ground, you need something called a block and tackle system. As the name suggests, a block and tackle system works by raising the ship onto blocks, but it's not as easy as just dropping the ship onto some logs. In fact, it's one of the most difficult feats of heavy lifting ever undertaken by man. Lifting a gigantic ship, hull out of the water, requires hundreds of thousands of tons of sheer power. That's roughly equivalent to moving a fully loaded 747 up a flight of stairs. It takes a lot of manpower and machinery to pull off. To help move the ship into position, special rail lines are installed along the dock. These lines are anchored to strong pillars and run parallel to each other, creating a track that the ship can roll back and forth on. A series of electric or hydraulic motors then turn the wheels that raise the tracks. By turning the wheels at different speeds, the workers can tilt the ship at different angles, allowing them to slide the ship out of the dock. Once the ship is out of the water, it's time to attach the rest of the vessel. These sections are typically built separately and then attached to the main hull. This usually happens using a process known as longitudinal seam welding. Once the sections are attached, the workers can begin installing the ship's superstructure, which includes everything from the bridge to the cabins to the storage areas. On the outside of the ship, things are welded together using a combination of robotic arms and human welders. On the inside, however, the situation is a little different. Because of the size of the ships, it would be impossible to weld the interior together from the inside. So instead, welders work from the outside, welding large metal plates onto the hull from the exterior. They then drill holes through the plates and weld nuts to the holes. After that, they can finish welding the pieces together from the inside. Now you're probably wondering what happens after the ship is finally finished. Well, that depends on whether it was built at a new ship facility or at a repair facility. If it was built at a new ship facility, the completed ship is launched down a ramp into the water and begins its voyage. If it was built at a repair facility, the process is reversed and the ship is put back into the water. While the launch of a new ship is an exciting event, it's also a dangerous one. Mega ships are so big that they require deep water access to function properly. That means they have to be transported from the dry dock to the ocean, which is no easy feat. The solution is to tow the ship to the ocean, but towing such a massive vessel is risky business. If the ship isn't properly secured, it could veer off course and crash into a building or worse, capsize and end up sideways in the water. That's why launching a ship is often done at night. Darkness makes it easier to control the ship during the launch and reduces the risk of an accident. Once the ship is in the water, lights are attached to either side of the bow, allowing tugboats to guide the ship to the open sea. Now, you may have noticed that throughout this entire process, we haven't seen any women, girls, or homosexuals. That's because the shipbuilding industry has a long history of being dominated by men. In fact, the word dockworker literally means a manual labourer who loads and unloads ships. Traditionally, only men were allowed to work in the dangerous conditions of the docks. Women were considered too delicate to work there and homosexuals were persecuted for their lifestyle. Of course, things have changed since then. Women now make up around 16% of the maritime industry, and there are even several lesbian and gay seafarers organizations. But the shipbuilding industry is still overwhelmingly male. Only 2% of the world's merchant mariners are women. And that's not the only interesting thing about the shipbuilding industry. Did you know that there are different types of ships? We've talked about cargo ships, but there are also passenger ships, military ships, and even research vessels. There are also different ways of building ships depending on their size and purpose. For example, submarines are built in dry docks while aircraft carriers are built on land. Another interesting fact about the shipbuilding industry is that it's constantly evolving. New technologies and materials are always being developed, which means that the way ships are built is constantly changing. For example, in the past, wood was the primary material used to build ships. But today, steel is the most common material. Also, in the past, ships were built by hand. But today, most of the work is done by machines. Despite all the changes that have occurred in the shipbuilding industry over the years, one thing has remained constant: the importance of the industry to world trade. Ships are still the most efficient way to transport goods over long distances. And that's why the shipbuilding industry is so important. So the next time you see a ship, take a moment to appreciate the incredible feat of engineering that went into building it. And remember that without the shipbuilding industry, world trade as we know it would not exist. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more great videos about construction, and check out our other videos too. We're sure you'll find something else you like.